by marijuana.
In 1937, when the Marijuana Tax Act was established, there were no data of any sort, much less scientific, about whether this compound was harmful or not. There was just evidence it was being used by people whom we distrusted and feared, and that it was associated with lower class people.
You go back and read the record in Congress, it's amazing the lack of information. There were literally questions by members of Congress saying, what is this marijuana? Is it a narcotic or what is it? And there would be a sentence, someone would stand up and say, oh, it's the most dangerous new drug coming down the pipe.
In terms of what Congress knew in 1937, they didn't know any of that history. The only history that they were given was all these cock and bull stories about how it made people crazy and they went out and killed people under the influence of marijuana.
The Tax Act was built on lies, and I think it's outrageous that we have legislation that still exists today it was based on lies.
Despite opposition by the American Medical Association, Congress passed the law unanimously after debating for a grand total of 90 seconds. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed it into law on August 3, 1937. Theoretically, the new law did not actually prohibit marijuana and hemp. Only a constitutional amendment could do that. But by imposing prohibitive taxes and mountains of red tape, it made cultivation, processing, sales, and any use of the hemp plant whatsoever virtually impossible. Technically, farmers could still legally grow a hemp plant like this one, but only if they could somehow grow it without the leaves and flowers. This law is still in effect today. The full reasons behind marijuana prohibition are still being debated. Some experts think racism played a part.
So that when poor people, immigrants, take the drugs, we're afraid they're going to rise up, smite, steal, and take the white women. And so we outlaw the drugs because of our fears over that.
Others think Harry Anslinger was motivated by ambition and power.
A great deal of the reason that marijuana was prohibited was because of self-aggrandizement at the federal level, especially with Harry Anslinger wanting to be the J. Edgar Hoover of his own agency.
Jack sees darker motives. His book alleges a high-level conspiracy revolving around Anslinger, Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon, the DuPont Chemical Company, and hemp. Before the Civil War, hemp was the nation's second-largest cash crop behind cotton. But while cotton could be processed by machine, slaves were the only cost-effective way to separate the tough hemp fiber from the pulpy core that was used to make paper. When slavery ended after the war, the hemp industry went into decline. The death knell was sounded in the late 1800s when paper makers converted to tree-based pulp.
It meant that you could chop down a forest a lot cheaper than you could pay laborers to manufacture hemp fiber for paper.
Jack hangs his conspiracy angle on events that happened simultaneously with marijuana prohibition. Coincidence number one. A German immigrant invented a machine called the decorticator. This new mechanical processing device was about to bring hemp into the modern industrial age. Popular Mechanics magazine recognized the potential bonanza for American farmers and entrepreneurs. This article heralded a machine that could process hemp quickly and cheaply for the first time in history. Coincidence number two. The DuPont company in the 30s came out with both a sulfuric acid method for making paper from trees and a new invention called plastic. Jack's book points out that a hemp resurgence would certainly have been a serious threat to DuPont's petrochemical strategies. And finally, there's millionaire financier Andrew Mellon. Mellon was Anslinger's boss, Harry's wife's uncle, and DuPont's banker. Coincidences number 3, 4, and 5.
Don't smoke all of my grass.
The book's credibility got a boost from Jack's discovery of this 14-minute documentary. Supposedly made by the U.S. government 5 years after the Marijuana Tax Act. Its purpose was to encourage farmers to grow outlawed hemp during World War II.
Long ago, when these ancient Grecian temples were new, hemp was already old in the service of mankind. For thousands of years even then, this plant had been grown for cordage and coarse cloth in China and elsewhere in the East. But now, with Philippine and East Indian sources of hemp in the hands of the Japanese, and shipment of jute from India curtailed, American hemp must meet the needs of our Army and Navy, as well as of our industries. In 1942, patriotic farmers, at the government's request, planted 36,000 acres of seed hemp, an increase of several thousand%. The goal for 1943 is 50,000 acres of seed hemp. For to grow hemp legally, you must have a federal registration and tax stamp. This is provided for in your contract. Ask your AAA committeeman or your county agent about it. Don't forget,
Jack often staged public showings of Hemp for Victory to validate his history of the plant. He also used the film as an example of government deception and hypocrisy. But he was stunned one day in 1988 to get a call from a newspaper reporter questioning the authenticity of the film.
Well, Mr. Hare, we went out to check the information, and we found nobody that would corroborate your story, that this movie was even ever made. You said this movie was made by the United States government, this movie Hemp for Victory, that if there would be any evidence that the government ever made such a film, it would be in the Library of Congress, it would be in the Department of Agriculture. It is in neither place.
His reputation on the line, Jack and his friends went on an excursion to Washington, D.C.
We were just determined to find the documentation that made it a credible government movie made by the U.S. government and not made by Jack. We didn't see it as detective work. We just saw it as we were on a mission. We're on a mission from God.
Many others before Jack had searched the Library of Congress for proof of the documentary's existence and found none. In a day of digging, Jack ran into the same lack of evidence.
After deciding to give up, we decided to give it one more try.
In a dusty old book, hidden among clutter in a back room, they found it. The official Library of Congress documentation. Indeed, the film had been made by the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Hemp for Victory.
In the few short years since The Emperor Wears No Clothes first began inspiring activists and entrepreneurs, the U.S. hemp industry has grown from Jack's ramshackle Venice Beach booth into a $100 million a year business.
I was shopping for a suit the other day and walked into the department store. Stepped on the elevator and told the girl, dry goods flow. When I got off, a salesman come up to me. He said, now what can I do for you? I said, well, go in there and show me all in sport clothes, like you supposed to. He said, well, sure, come on in, buddy, and dig these fabrics we got laid out on the shelf. He said,
pick yourself out one, try it on, stand in the mirror and dig yourself.
The world's getting this information. It's coming out on billboards. It's coming out on companies all over, everywhere.
As hemp gained mainstream acceptance in the 90s, so did Jack. His critics became allies.
When Steve Hager became editor of High Times in the late 80s, and he went ahead and just wrote column after column, article after article, month after month in his magazine. And that's really what exploded the idea of hemp, more to the colleges, more to everybody that picked up a High Times now read about hemp.
In 1994, he was honored by the conservative Drug Policy Foundation in Washington.
His efforts for showing the impact one individual can have on the lives of many others, Jack Herer is awarded the 1994 Robert C. Randall Award for achievement in the field of citizen action.
At the awards dinner, the emperor wore a hemp suit.
Leaning on a tree trunk, thinking all the same junk, falling in and out of a dream. Back and forth I'm swaying, I'm contemplating staying, laying and...
But nothing vindicated Jack more than a 1992 Lifetime Achievement Award from his longtime adversary, Normal.
How do I calm myself at times like these? I need a simple kind of lovely, and the thought is just a novelty.
From a nemesis to a prophet, I think is the way to look at it. He was a bother and troublesome until he began to realize he had really discovered very important aspect of why it is that marijuana should be reconsidered and why the illegality of it is so preposterous and unfair.
I think that Jack's place in the history of anti-prohibition movement is going to be secured by the simple fact that he, despite everybody's criticisms, everybody thinking he was crazy, that he had the persistence and the temerity to simply keep going on and saying the truth over and over and over again, no matter, it sometimes seems like you have to say the truth many times before anybody hears it.
The Emperor Wears No Clothes is a book that's had an enormous impact in this country on awakening millions of Americans to the fact that the marijuana laws are wrong, that they're based on false premises, that they're racial in nature, and that we need to change them. I don't know anyone who's had as much impact as Jack has.
Neither Jack nor anyone else in the outgunned, outspent reform movement was having any impact at all on U.S. drug policies. In the last years of the 20th century, incredibly, America was the only industrialized nation that still forbid hemp farming, forcing the U.S. hemp industry to import all its raw material. According to the government, allowing farmers to grow hemp would confuse police and send a wrong message to children.
Drugs are every nation's problem, and every nation must act to fight them. We are determined to build the drug-free America and to join with others to combat drugs around the world. Let there be no doubt, this is ultimately a struggle for human freedom.
In the 90s, the federal government escalated the war on marijuana, spending a record amount of money to arrest a record number of Americans, most for simple possession.